So I am delighted for this next conversation. We're going to dive into agrovoltaics and talk about how they can serve as a cross-sector solution to the climate crisis. This is a topic I am just digging into. It's something that has been on my radar for a long time. I'm nerding out about it, so I'm really, really thrilled for this conversation. Let me introduce our panelists. We have Miles Braxton, the co-founder and CEO of Okovate Sustainable Energy. Round of applause. Jesse Robertson-Dubois, the Director of Sustainable Solar Development with Bluewave. And we have Ethan Winter, the National Smart Solar Director at American Farmland Trust. Nice to see you. So Ethan, I have to start with you because I think we need to break this down a little bit and talk about how renewable energy can help us build resilience in our agriculture systems. It's kind of obvious, but I think it deserves to be broken down a little.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having us. We heard Secretary Kerry talk earlier about Solar Plus. What we're going to be talking about is Solar Plus Plus Plus, the integration of agriculture in the renewable energy transition, and the necessary aspects of that. A lot of ways, necessity is the mother of invention. And what we have in this country are two very interesting forces coming together. We have really challenging conditions for farming. Climate change is making farming harder. We have a demographic cliff for a lot of producers. And we heard from Klaus earlier today talking about transitioning his farm to the next generation and having something really valuable to give to the next generation. We also have an accelerating energy transition that is going to be fundamentally focused on solar. Solar will be a central pillar of decarbonization in this country, and it is land intensive. Solar requires 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. We're going to need thousands and thousands and thousands of megawatts to decarbonize. And as it turns out, the best land for solar tends to be the best land for growing food. So what we're trying to figure out with this concept of agrivoltaics is how can we do this together in a way that builds agricultural resilience, that builds pathways for new farmers, and doesn't create a binary trade-off between energy and food.
So agrovoltaics, define it.
That's a great question. AFT has a very farmer-centric focus on what agrivoltaics is. It's the intentional design and co-location of solar energy generation and farming, agricultural production, on the same piece of land for the life of the project. And importantly for AFT, there needs to be an agricultural product in that process.
Right.
So there's also something that is emerging, which is more of an ecological dual use. We call that ecovoltaics. So you've learned two new words today, agrivoltaics and ecovoltaics. And think of those as being part of this dual use approach, a multi-benefit approach to solar, so that solar is doing more than just generating electrons.
Right.
It's actually providing multi-benefits for farming and farming communities.
And this is a part of American Farmland Trust's smart solar principles, right?
We've developed a set of principles to help guide this work.
Yeah.
Because we know that if we don't do this right, this transition to solar will be potentially highly disruptive to rural communities.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if we get this right, it will be really beneficial and necessary. So our principles are first to take pressure off the land that's already under pressure. And we heard from John and others earlier today about how much farmland we're losing. If thousands of acres, potentially millions of acres of land are being converted to solar without an agricultural aspect, we're losing that potential food security.
Yeah.
Secondly is providing soil health principles in everything we do around solar. So thinking about regenerative practices, bringing that into the essence of what solar development is all about.
Yeah.
We had a recent conference where we did a soil health 101 for the solar industry. This is not dirt. Sometimes it's called dirt in the industry, right? I know that would be very offensive to people in this room to hear that people are calling this dirt. It is soil, it is a living organism, and we're trying to bring those principles in. So agrivoltaics builds off of that. And then the fourth principle is farm viability. And in fact, that's really the mantle for all of this, is making sure that this energy transition fundamentally distributes benefits equitably to farmers, especially small and mid-sized producers who need to be at the table in this transition.
I love the intentionality of it, and I love the silo breaking that's happening. It's really cool that energy I mean, because this doesn't happen, energy and farming folks talking together. So thank you for explaining all that. Jesse, I want to turn to you and talk about how we can effectively integrate effectively integrate agrivoltaics into farming systems to boost renewable energy production without compromising agricultural land.
Thank you, Danny. It really all comes down to the intentionality. Ethan described it as intentional design. And what we're doing at Bluewave is really looking at every single one of our solar sites as a potential dual-use site or a triple-use site. What can we do there in terms of managing the design, managing the soil stewardship during construction, and then managing the operations and maintenance to make sure that that land continues to be productive. But it didn't really start there, right? Like figuring out how to do intentional design, ultimately you have to start with a kernel of trying to do something different. And for me personally, I didn't come from a solar development background. I was a farmer. My first job out of college was with American Farmland Trust. I've gone back and forth between farmland protection policy work and agriculture. And for me, it was just driving by solar arrays back in the mid-2000 teens as Massachusetts was starting to do the first big build out of solar. And just looking through the fence and noticing that the grass was greening up earlier in the springtime underneath the panels and then staying green later in the fall. It was that, it's sort of like the farmer looking and saying, this is a microclimate.
Yeah.
And at its core, agriculture is about managing microecosystems, microclimates. And so what can you do? We raise sheep, we raise vegetables, we had cattle. It was like, look, the cattle aren't going to work in there, right? These are conventional systems. But we could definitely graze sheep in there. Oh, we could definitely graze some of the crops in there. And so it wasn't unique to me, right?
Sure.
Shepherds all over the country have started doing this.
Yeah.
There's, at this point now, over 100,000 acres of solar land that's being actively grazed with sheep. The American Solar Grazing Association was formed several years back. It's a farmer-led group of folks who are like, we can do this. Let us inside the fence. Let us figure this out. Let us help you do it better. To go the next step, you start spacing those panels out. Well, now you're talking about different wind loads for the engineering. You're talking about going higher so you can fit cattle underneath the systems. But we're doing that. We built 4 projects last year that are all agrivoltaic. We have beef cattle out there grazing underneath the panels right now. They're not breaking anything. They can scratch on the posts. We put the panels up high enough, they can go right underneath it. It takes knowing how good regenerative agriculture works, right? You don't necessarily need to have all the panels be 15 feet in the air. If you have a rotating tracker system, you can lock it in horizontal for a portion of the array where the cattle are rotating through. All of a sudden now you've managed to save a lot of excess steel, saving all of the resources involved, but you're incentivizing that type of regenerative agriculture. And you're working with a farmer to help them do a better job on their farm. We're actually working with a dairy farm in central New York where they're looking at this as a benefit to their farming operation because the cattle are going to have shade during the summer months. If you're dairy farming, it's all about what your productivity is per cow, and it's about your cow comfort and your cow health because comfort and health ultimately drive their ability to produce milk. That shade is going to be a game changer for them.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, which I love, is a lot of experimentation and like trial and error, and I love that. And it gives farmers an opportunity to learn things that they didn't know about, and for all of you at AFT to learn things that you didn't know about. So it's very cool. Miles, if I can turn to you, I want to talk about how agrivoltaics are impacting rural communities, especially as it relates to land access and that next generation of farmers that we've been talking about all morning.
I think it's a really amazing opportunity that we have with agrivoltaics to open up more land access and more land opportunity for new farmers. Like you said, a lot of these systems are going in rural communities where land access is needed. Farmers are looking for land, and also, we heard in previous panels, not only looking for land, but paying and renting for land itself themselves, right? This is a unique opportunity where, these are $1 million systems that we're able to provide financing to. So, in addition to that, what's paying a tenant farmer, over a 30-year contract to farm at that site versus them having to pay, on a rent basis year by year, and looking for other opportunities, as they come up. And then I think, additionally, with the general opportunity, we're not only keeping farms farming, but we
Right.
also are opening up, like Jesse said, regenerative agricultural practices to new farms that may not have had that before.
Right.
So now with these additional, this additional income from dual revenue streams from both agriculture and sometimes solar lease payments, based on kind of the financeability of the systems, how those were financed. Now they're able to reinvest back into their
Yeah.
regenerative agriculture practices. Organic matter that is going to boost their yields over the next 2 years that they've had in the plan for the last 3 years that they haven't been able to afford. Now they're able to afford that with through agrivoltaics. So at Okovate, we talk to a lot of soy and corn farmers, which is not necessarily the best crops that work with the designs of agrivoltaics. Well, at least corn, maybe not. Sweet corn does pretty well, but standard corn, not so much. But we're seeing that, okay, maybe this doesn't work, as is, but now if we introduce a crop rotation with your soybeans,
Yeah.
and actually, look at this from a standpoint of we want to help you enrich the soil and boost your yields over a long-term period. Now it's something that's attractive, not just financially, but generationally for just being stewards to the land. So I think there's so many opportunities to bring more stewards
Yeah.
to help, create these regenerative practices and push
So many
that forward.
opportunities, right? Can you talk about the role of public-private partnerships in this?
Yeah, I think that's really important. In order to deploy these systems, we're going to continue to need catalytic capital, impact capital, but also partnerships with public utilities, with town commissions who are now putting together solar ordinances. They need to understand the benefits of agrivoltaics
Yeah.
and the benefits of dual use systems. A lot of towns, municipalities have put this, kind of red bad mark on solar. Okay, we're just not going to do it. We have a moratorium.
Sure.
That's an easy way to go about it. Why not look at incentivizing solar to be developed with agriculture in mind if the main concern is this is tearing up our agricultural integrity? American Farmland Trust has an amazing statistic that in order to hit the goals of the Inflation Reduction Act for solar procurement, we need, or 83% of future solar is going to go on farmland. We need to de-risk that because these projects are getting canceled too, and we need solar energy. So we need to continue to accelerate the deployment, and that looks like partnering, educating a lot of these municipalities who have this one idea of a solar project. That's not what our solar projects look like. That's not what Bluewave solar projects look like. We're starting from a farmer first perspective and building this project around what they want to do, their plan for the future of their farm.
That's so important to always put farmers first. This is for all of you, and Miles touched on it. Let's talk about the barriers to this and what is keeping this from scaling up and out in different ways.
Yeah, I guess I'd say we're in this policy limbo with agrivoltaics at this point. And it's really, I just want to drive home how important it is to have policy to help define what agrivoltaics is and to recognize and legitimize it.
Yeah.
Massachusetts has really been one of the leaders, and now it's being followed by New Jersey and New York with state programs to try to, A, incentivize some of the additional costs for engineering for extra height, extra width, higher wind loads, but also just at a very foundational level, defining what it means.
Yeah.
It gives you a legitimacy when you're talking with that local zoning board and saying like, hey, we want to do this differently. They say, oh, come on, that's just greenwash. Well, if you have a set of rules that defines it, you actually have a starting point. The Bluewave and several other solar developers have been working on starting a new organization, Solar and Farming Association, to work in partnership with the American Solar Grazing Association as a farmer-led organization. What ASGA has done for solar grazing has been amazing, but we really need to bring a larger effort to push for a federal definition, both to help legitimize this, but then also importantly for the farmers to make sure that they remain eligible for USDA programs. Right
Yeah.
now, somebody farming in a solar array may not be eligible for conservation programs because it's not a farm.
Yeah.
It's a solar array. And so that kind of policy structure at the state level and the federal level is just
Yeah.
absolutely critical.
Ethan, can you weigh in on that policy
Yeah, I'd
need?
love to. And Jesse nailed it. We're really on the cusp of some really big stuff here.
Yeah.
And here we are at Climate Week. This may be the one session on agrivoltaics here in New York. This is going to be a major theme in the future.
I
So
can't
those of
wait.
you who are here, remember this day. It's a big deal. Just in the past year, we have 2 bipartisan bills that have been introduced in the U.S. Senate around agrivoltaics. You now have Secretary Granholm from DOE talking about agrivoltaics, Chuck Grassley talking
Right,
about agrivoltaics.
right. I love
This
it.
is interesting, right? And you have land-grant universities across the country,
Right.
from UC Davis to Cornell to Rutgers, who are developing these interdisciplinary sustainable solar programs because they are getting ahead of this.
Yeah.
And we're doing everything we can at AFT to be, connected into those efforts. And policy will be key. And there's a research feedback loop, right, where we need to have applied research, looking at field trials, what works, also social science,
Right.
to make sure that we're understanding how farmer adoption works. And I think there's an interesting analogy to the regenerative agriculture movement, where you started with early adopters and good science, and you tweak the policy, and you go back to the farmers, and you keep reiterating this.
Yep.
And we're at the beginning of that cycle now. There's about 10 states across the country that have either developed some kind of incentive or have an R&D program for agrivoltaics that did not exist 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's how
really
new this
exciting
is.
time.
States to keep an eye out on, you mentioned Massachusetts. New Jersey is about to unveil a 200 megawatt dual use pilot program in coordination with Rutgers and AFT and other partners. New York has a $5 million R&D program that they launched this summer after much work and cajoling, because a lot of states look to New York for leadership on
Sure,
climate policy.
sure,
That's why we're
sure.
here. So stay tuned for New York, but you have other states as well that are looking at this. And it's going to be really interesting to see how industry responds. One thing I'll just mention, at the major solar conference in Anaheim 2 weeks ago, RE+, there was quite a lot of programming around agrivoltaics.
Yeah.
3 years ago, there was basically none. So that's how quickly this is taking a foothold with
Yeah.
the industry. At RE+, the Department of Energy announced a cattle solar prize, $8 million prize for who can come up with the most integrated solutions for cattle and large-scale solar.
cool.
The other thing that happened at RE+ was a report from the Solar Energy Industries Association and their research arm, which is called SI2. They did a survey. And they surveyed farmers, utilities, and solar developers. And what they found was a really interesting insight into what's about to happen. 70% of farmers said they would be interested in doing solar with the condition that they could do dual use. So that was a major caveat.
Yeah.
80% of the developers in that survey said, we expect to be integrating dual use into our
Nice.
future portfolios.
Nice.
Goes back to what Jesse said. What's that definition?
Right.
This is more than sprinkling some black-eyed Susans in the corner, right? We're talking about equipment and farmers and soil health protocols
Sure.
being built into the business models of these projects going
Sure.
forward. But that's what's about to happen.
Sure. I need to add 30 seconds on the clock because I want you to all give a call to action. So, Jesse, I'd like you to go first. How do we get others involved in this sector? What's your call to action to people watching, people listening?
I'm going to sneak 2 in there. I already mentioned SAFA, solar and farming. But go to local planning meetings and just raise the question, what if we could do it better?
Yeah.
What if this isn't just a simple NIMBY, I don't want to look at it? What if the solar you can't see is probably not good solar. Let's have solar we can see that's better.
Awesome. Ethan.
Boy, so many things. I would say support and invest in farmer technical assistance. Those of you who are working with foundations and with the philanthropies, this is going to be a big bottleneck very quickly. If this thing lights like we think it's going
Yep.
to, we need farmer support systems.
Amazing. Miles, you get the last word.
Yeah. Invest in the doers. Invest in the folks that are implementing this and making it happen. Doing the research on the front lines and then taking that research and bringing it to commercialization. I think it's so important that we continue to just bring in more capital
Yeah.
to allow for this. All the folks that are now investing in solar, the the Googles, Microsofts of the world. They need to look at this from a lens of, is our investment at risk and of removing farmland? And looking at, okay, how do we also invest in, not only other technologies, but agrivoltaics as a part of our portfolio as well, and really being stewards to the land. So that's my call
That's
to
great.
action.
I love invest in the doers, invest in the farmers. Round of applause for this panel, please. Thank you all so much. That was great.
Thank you.